All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Wednesday, November 19th, and what have you been thinking about?
What have I been thinking about? Well, the corruption scandal. I guess that's the big news. The corruption scandal in Kiev. Yeah, it seems to be picking up steam. Heads are rolling. The most recent is the current Justice Minister, I think it's Galushenko, who was formerly the Minister of Energy. And it was in that capacity that he engaged in corruption, because, of course, this was this Mindich character, the close associate of Zelensky, he was skimming off these contracts between the justice or I guess it was Energoatom. That's actually, that's the atomic energy agency within Ukraine. And he had some sort of scheme where he was getting kickbacks from the various contractors, that did work for Energoatom. And during that time, when that scheme took off, the Minister of Energy was this Galushenko, who is currently the Minister of Justice. Quite a Minister of Justice. But he has been fired. And I guess the current Minister of Energy has resigned. And now, there's this growing kind of chorus of angry chorus directed at Yermak, who many people say is the true power in Ukraine, in Zelensky's government. He's the power behind the throne, the great cardinal.
Why? Why did he get that reputation?
Well, he's had that for a long time. He's understood to be the true power within Ukraine, and there have been a lot of actually articles in the Western media about that too. Yeah. There's been a lot of frustration, a lot of anger is directed at him, rather than at Zelensky. Zelensky is in general shielded from, the most heated attacks. He still is an important figurehead, kind of a symbol of Ukraine. So he tends not to get the most pointed criticism. Yermak gets it, because it's understood that he is in charge of much of the government. Now he's just been, up until very recently, it seemed like his position was not really under any kind of threat. Like Zelensky himself, he's had a very, very firm control, on the government there. He, together with Zelensky, have been methodically, again, removing all kinds of rivals, opponents, anybody who hasn't been, fully loyal or fully obedient to them. So it looked like his position was very secure. But recently, there has been a lot of anger expressed and calls for his removal from within the Servant of the People Party. Which is, by far the largest party in the parliament. That's, of course, Zelensky's party. And that is new. That hasn't happened before. So there's a chance that he might go, and that is significant. It doesn't, it's not clear that that'll have what kind of consequences that will have. Again, we're looking, when you look at Ukrainian politics, you don't see these, as they exist now, you don't see any clearly delineated, let's say, ideological or policy choices. It seems, it seems to be more about personalities and, and different influence groups. Everybody, let's say Yermak goes, Yermak, of course, has been very closely associated with Zelensky. But what would that do? I don't know. Who can you point to that would actually pursue a different policy? It's hard to say. Within his party, and then even without. It's interesting. Among his fiercest critics are now, appearing within the Servant of the People Party. But there is a very small party which is ultra-Western called the Holist Party, and they're very closely associated with Soros, which gives you an idea. And you would think that they would be, anti-Yermak. Yermak is sort of an embodiment of corruption and everything that that people don't like about the Zelensky regime. But Alexander, Soros, the son of George Soros, is actually a very good friend of Yermak's. So I don't know what's going to happen if Yermak goes. I don't even know how you can get rid of him, because he is, his title is just head of the office of the president, which is not supposed to really have much power. It's not an important position. He's not a minister in the government or anything. If he steps down from that, does that really change anything? He'll still have all his connections, and he can actually continue to exert influence, from behind the scenes in the way that he has as the head of the office of the president. It's not clear to me that anything will change. So it's just a mess. I don't, there's clearly a lot of anger, and that I think is really, They know, I think a lot of people understand that Zelensky's a big part of the problem, together with Yermak. But so far, nobody is actually pointing the finger at Zelensky, not openly. They're not going after him. He's not being denounced. It's Yermak. If they somehow manage to get rid of Yermak, that would seriously, I don't know how they would do it. Like I said, you would have to put him in jail or get him out of the country or whatever, because I think if he's there, he's still going to exert influence. But let's say you manage to get him, to defang him somehow, to render him impotent. Well, that would actually be a real blow to Zelensky, and that would reduce his power within the government. I think there's no question about it. Now, so there would be some kind of vacuum. There would be a chance for another faction, to get their people in there. But when you look at it, you don't see some sort of clear policy preference on the part of these other groups. Certainly within, because it would be from within the Servant of the People, but they're, against Zelensky's party. And I just don't see any significant change taking place there. It's going to be important to the people involved. Now we've lost power, me and my buddies, those people that I hate over there, they've taken power, but I think, the war will go on and nothing will change significantly. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but I just don't see it. I don't see nobody's saying, okay, well, this group is poised to take power and they're going to do something different.
Yeah, okay. Well, within Ukraine, there's going to be a lot of shuffling, a lot of blame game. But like you said, maybe things won't really change. The war will continue. You'll just replace other ultra nationalists with other ultra nationalists. But I think this corruption scandal has done irreparable damage to Ukraine's war effort, though, right? Just because the support within Europe was already kind of on it wasn't rock solid. Let's say a lot of people are looking for a reason to kind of like, I don't want to be funding this, the economy's bad. And just that image of the golden toilet with piles of cash, I think really just ripped apart a lot of people's faith in Ukraine. Because I just saw it on X yesterday. Just scrolling, I would see, Ukraine propagandists and supporters posting like, oh, we got to help Ukraine, support, donate, do these things. And all the top comments were like, for this corrupt country, no way. People just dropping pictures of the golden toilet. And that imagery is just like, this is how corrupt you are. We're taking dumps in gold toilets with your money. Just that image, even if we were talking about $100 million, which $100 million is a lot of money, but we're talking about hundreds of billions that have been pumped into this country. Just imagine how much, we just saw a little tiny bit, tip of the iceberg, but it just needed that one image of the golden toilet and stacks of cash. I think that did it. I think that has really hurt the Ukraine war effort. Support, I think, has dropped significantly because of that.
Well, it certainly has hurt them. There's no question about it. One thing, getting rid of Yermak and some other people, the justice minister is already gone. The former defense minister, he's out there in the Middle East. supposedly negotiating with the Russians, but the Russians said they haven't heard from them. I think Yermak himself is supposed to be in Turkey, which is interesting, supposedly negotiating with the Russians again. That some sort of pretend negotiation. Very, very strange affair. But let's say, you get these heads roll. Yermak actually is at least appears to be out of power. You put in new faces, new names, and you see, well, look, Ukraine did it. They had a corruption problem, but they're clearly on the right path. I think that's the kind of spin that we're going to hear. Now,
do you think it'll be effective?
It may be partially effective. I think you're right that that image of the golden toilet has been seared in everybody's minds, and it's gonna continue to hurt them. I think that it's done some permanent damage, but it may not be fatal. That's just what I would say.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. It seems like it doesn't really matter what the people in Europe think anyways. All their leaders are unpopular. But you think there has to get to some point where
Right.
people in France or in Germany or the UK just like, enough is enough. If nobody likes you, you've got like 15% approval rating.
Right.
How is this continuing?
Yeah, there clearly is a limit. Again, these people are very unpopular. In general, there just isn't the popular support for Ukraine that that Ukraine, in fact, needs to continue the war. It's just not there. But the leadership is still committed to it. But the leadership can't, entirely ignore what the electorates, the people think. Clearly at some point they have to take them into account. They'll play these games, but it does constrain, their scope of action, and in this case, their ability to support Ukraine. We see it already just when we're talking about the amount of support. Again, they're supporting Ukraine. What was it? Chancellor Merz said, oh, we're going to send them 11.5 billion euros next year, which is roughly 3 billion up from the current year. Again, that didn't go over well. The guy is very, very unpopular. But just in general, they're not even close to getting coming up with the necessary funds to support Ukraine, to allow it to sustain its war effort in any meaningful form. And because they can only go so far in cutting services. They already have a very angry electorate, and they know they just can't push it much farther. They are coming up against a wall. It's there, so it is a problem.
Yeah, and we've talked about the frozen assets in Euroclear, the Russian assets, and it sounds like Belgium really doesn't want to seize it. They understand the severity of that thing. They said that they will sue the European Union or whatever body tries to force them to do that. So do you think that they will be able to get those assets? Because if they don't, then we're looking at a fiscal cliff that Ukraine is rapidly approaching. We're talking about in the spring, they may be out of money. And it sounds like the ability of Europe to, build up its war chest is not there. It can't keep on funneling money into Ukraine.
Yeah, no, it's a real problem. It is a true crisis. In a way, it's even, we've talked about the crisis right there on the front. But this is maybe even more important, and it's going to have even greater consequences. They are, on the edge of a fiscal cliff. And, unless there's a sudden change in policy, they're going to fall off that cliff. And
what happens when they fall off? Does the war end then? All of a sudden, nobody's getting paid, and then it just, people just start eating each other alive.
It's just that that could lead to a coup. It can lead to and to a true collapse. We even with the support that they have now, we can see like the beginning of a collapse, again, in specific points on the front in a way that we've never seen before. Again, a more rapid movement since 2022. There are real changes taking place. They are in serious trouble already. So it's not even clear that they can really hang in there before they get to that fiscal cliff, but certainly when they get to the fiscal cliff, they're going to go over and the whole thing's going to come crashing down. Now, it's just when that becomes apparent, there just may be pressures within the West to do something about it. It's not clear. I think, now that we've laid this out, this great crisis, we have the corruption crisis, we have the fiscal crisis, we have the battlefield crisis. All these things are going on at the same time. I think we should mention there's news that just came out today. I don't know what to make of it, so I can't really comment on it much. But both Axios and Reuters are claiming that there have been that the U.S. is about to present some kind of peace plan, and it's something that they worked out together with the Russians over the last few weeks, and they're going to present it to Kiev. And what they're saying is that Zelensky has been so weakened, I think by these various crises, they named the corruption crisis in particular, that he'll just have to accept it. And they say they don't care what the Europeans say about it. Now, I don't know if any of this is true. I mean, it's just Axios and Reuters, they don't, sometimes information that's leaked to them proves to be true, sometimes not, who knows?
Well, I think to assume that Zelensky will accept it or will be forced to accept it is a big assumption. Don't make assumptions with cokeheads. They won't. I have a feeling no matter what is presented, Zelensky will say no, keep on fighting, because he knows he's done. Any deal that he accepts, that Russia would be willing to accept, would be the death of him, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there is, let's say, increasing support within the country for at least some kind of ceasefire. We're not talking about a big peace deal, but a ceasefire. And that actually you find even among the ultranationalists. In some cases, the ultranationalists, maybe in general, the ultranationalists are more open to a ceasefire than the Western-oriented liberals are, which is, I find, very, very interesting, but it's quite true. I mean, I think it's partly because, it's the ultranationalists are the ones that are doing the killing and the dying. They know what's really happening on the front, and they know they're in trouble, and a lot of them, not all of them, but many of them are actually are asking for a ceasefire. The liberals, they never get close to the front. Everybody else is other Ukrainians are doing the dying for them, and they're in favor of just continuing the war forever. So there is support, among the very important ultranationalists and the general population for some kind of ceasefire. I haven't seen, and then we've talked about we saw a poll recently that was conducted by the Institute of Sociology in Ukraine that showed that 16% of the population said just accept everything the Russians offer. That's still a small minority, but again, it's gone way up. But that's 16% is still a long, long ways to go. And if the Russians have held their ground, then that's what you're going to need. You're going to have to accept their terms, and I don't know that you have if that's possible in today's Ukraine. Even if Zelensky is weakened, I don't think I don't think anybody is going to accept those terms at this point. Essentially, what they call Istanbul Plus. Maybe with a slight modification, with reference to Zaporozhye and Kherson.
Okay, well, this is just something you saw in Axios and what other publication?
Reuters.
Do we have any Reuters? Do we know when this peace plan is going to be presented?
Well, they're saying it's going to be soon, that it could happen within a week, by the end of the month. So we'll see.
How hopeful are you? I mean, I've heard talk about this forever.
I just find it very hard to believe. First of all, I just find it when you look at everything that the Russians have been saying recently, they seem to be very, very pessimistic. And there's no sign that from the Russian side that any kind of negotiations have been taking place. I haven't seen any sign whatsoever. So this just seemed to come out of nowhere. And who knows, so I have trouble believing that it's real. But it's just, again, these are two, maybe not entirely reliable, I think I'm being very polite, news agencies, but two very large ones and important ones. And so for some reason, this news is being put out there. And I don't know why. Peskov, the Putin's spokesman, was asked about it. And he essentially said that, well, we haven't changed anything since Alaska, what we agreed upon at Alaska, which our understanding, I think it is correct. We can't be completely sure, but is basically Istanbul Plus, with a temporary ceasefire in the two regions, Zaporozhye and Kherson, but then also withdrawal entirely from the Donbass by the Ukrainians. That was what they agreed to. I think that we're safe in making that assumption. And so he said that nothing has changed since then. And what he said, there's no more news to add, or see something to that effect. And I don't know if that means that we don't, I'm not going to say anything, or we're just saying we haven't even heard anything. It was somewhat ambiguous. So I don't know what's going on.
Yeah,
we do have these signals. Clearly, it seems to be pretend negotiations. Umerov and Yermak in Turkey, and the Russians have outright said nothing's happening. We haven't even heard from them, but they're pretending that they're negotiating. I don't know what. And then we have, this apparent, peace plan that just has come completely out of the blue, from the Americans, and I don't know what that's all about.
Right. And it's right after the Americans announced secondary sanctions, saying that any country that does trade with Russia, buys Russian oil or gas, is going to be...
or there's the intention to do that. That hasn't really taken, concrete form yet.
Do you think it will? Because, the problem with these types of things is there's no enforcement mechanism, right? It's like, how are you going to stop China and Russia that share this massive border from engaging in trade when they have the ability to use SIP payments, RMB, whatever?
Yeah.
It's like,
you can sanction them. You can impose tariffs on them. There are ways that you can.
Well, how's that worked out for the U.S.
Yeah,
China?
It obviously hasn't. It just can't. In the case of China, they've made it clear they're just not going to tolerate it, and we've had to back off, and we've backed off a couple of times already in a very, let's say, a humiliating manner. But it may just go forward. Remember, another thing's happening in connection with the tariffs. There's this court decision that's going to come down, and it looks bad for Trump. And but he could impose tariffs through the Congress, and that maybe is what he'll want to do. Now, you could argue that the threat of the secondary tariffs, the recent sanctions on the Russian oil companies, that was just part of Trump's, typical pressure tactics, right? There's a carrot and the stick, and he was wielding the stick there, but all the while he was conducting negotiations, and we're going to see the fruit of that soon. I don't know. I really don't know what to make of that. It just doesn't seem very likely to me. But we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, it's all looking bad for Ukraine, but it seems like the Europeans refuse to recognize that it's looking bad. I saw that France has made a deal with Ukraine, 100 Rafale fighters.
Right.
It's like they're ignoring what's happening right in front of them right now, and they're making these deals. Didn't Keir Starmer sign some 100-year treaty with Ukraine? It's like they're doing these long-term plans that it's like, is there even going to be a Ukraine to honor this at the end of this? It's this refusal to recognize the problem right here in front of them now, and it's approaching them fast. We've talked about the running out of men, the running out of money, the running out of support. They're just running out of time. So how much longer do you see this going on? And do you see anything that the West can do to keep it going longer? It just seems like it seems like it's all falling apart at once. This corruption scandal, along with this incipient collapse and more rapid movements along the front line, this fiscal cliff that they're rapidly approaching. Do you see this lasting much longer?
Well, again, it just looks very bad. That's it. Something could happen. It's like when a real collapse happens, or, they really get to the edge of the fiscal cliff, then we may see, maybe there will be some response within the West, particularly from the Americans. It just may be that again, Trump, he's Mr. 180. He's pursued a lot of strategies, and then he's abandoned them. It just seems to be his habit. And now, his current policy of not providing direct military support to Ukraine, asking the Europeans to pay for it. If it looks like, if a collapse really begins and the people around him say, hey, Trump, you got yourself in Afghanistan here. You got to do something fast. He could do a 180. I mean, and maybe, open up.
And do what though? Do what?
Okay, right, well, right, exactly. You can do something. You can. There's not like there are no weapons that we can provide, and and we're pretty good at printing money. That's something that the Europeans don't have the luxury of doing. So we can provide something, but I think even that, it could slow the collapse, but it's not going to prevent it. It's going to continue, and in the end, he will have an Afghanistan on his hand. But they will, it's very possible that at some point we'll see him reverse himself, as he's done on all kinds of things. I think we. Yeah,
I just think.
I think you're right. It's not. I know it's not going to save Ukraine, but it could temporarily slow the rate of the collapse, and that could happen. Let's just say that.
Well, I just don't know what even the U.S. can do anymore. You're not going to send American soldiers over there. That's not going to fly. Even sending more money is going to be incredibly unpopular with the current situation here in the United States with their economy. It's just, and we've been talking about tomahawks. It's like, okay, maybe you do that and risk escalation. I mean, I just don't think that they've been thinking nonstop for the past 3 years on what we can do. Exactly. And it's like they've run out. They've just run out. I mean, they've run out to the point where we're talking about hard limits. They've run out of men in Ukraine. We're running out of We've run out of Patriot interceptors. We've just run out of munitions. Right. So it's just like, what do you want? What else can we do? We're out of money. I mean, it's not just. It's just so crazy that Russia really has attrited not only Ukraine but most of NATO. It's really insane. It's really impressive.
Right.
And so now we're just at this point. We're like, okay, well, we've been completely attrited. Maybe we should go to war with China. Maybe that's what we should do.
Right. Yeah. Brilliant move. No. There's, what you say is true. There's, and just when you were talking about that, I thought again about these rumors from Reuters and Axios. Maybe what's behind it is that the Americans themselves are seeing. I don't think so. But I'm just going to throw this out here. I don't think they're this sensible and realistic. But maybe they see the writing on the wall. They see all these things that we're seeing right now, and they say, "Hey, we just got to get out of this." And Zelensky, okay, he's damaged goods now. He's going to have to accept it now. What happened before, again, there was a deal that, again, an offer made by the Americans, presented by Witkoff in August. Then we had the summit in Alaska. And at there, again, Putin said, okay, yeah, I accept your offer. And let's go forward with this. And Trump said, yeah, I'll get back to you on that. And he never did. But then there was a phone call between Putin and Trump, just a few weeks ago. That led to that Trump's proposal to have the summit in Budapest, right? But immediately after that, Zelensky showed up, and everybody says, I've seen many reports on this, both at the time and then later, that Trump, initially had presented the Russian position and said, look, you got to accept this. And then Zelensky just fought and insisted, oh, no, we got the situation under control. We're going to win here. We're going to win there. The Russians are lying to you. And eventually, at the end of this confrontation, apparently, Zelensky came with maps and Trump actually threw the maps, aside, I don't want to see your stupid maps. But at the end, Trump backed down. And maybe he seemed to have been convinced that, oh, okay, yeah, the Ukrainians still have a shot at this. They're going to, or maybe they'll even win somehow,
Well, he doesn't think that now, I guess.
Yeah, but so what I'm thinking is this is a possible interpretation. I don't know if this is true, but a possible interpretation is just that the developments since then and intelligence that he's reached that finally got to his ears and maybe, he really understood is that they're in deep, deep trouble. They're losing those battles that like Pokrovsk and Kupiansk and the other ones, that Zelensky told you he was going to win. They're lost already. it's really grim. It's looking bad. We have a potential Afghanistan on our hands. And then Trump, hearing that, said, "Damn, okay, I should go back to, what Putin, that offer that I actually made Putin stick with it." And so the whole thing started again. That's a possibility.
Right. And that makes sense to me. I could see that. But would Putin accept it now? It's like, well, now, things have changed. We move further. We've lost men. We've taken these cities. We're advancing rapidly. Will we go back to the agreement we had in Alaska? I mean,
Yeah.
or is there going to be pressure to?
Yeah, I know he might still accept it. Again, there is a ways to go. Slavyansk and Kramatorsk are, and they're still Konstantinovka. They're already in Konstantinovka. But, when you look at all these cities together, you're talking about a population of like 300,000, and that gives you a sense of the size of the cities they need to take. It's still, there's still a lot of fighting ahead. He might accept it, but yeah, I mean, it's just the whole offer from the Russian perspective is just less appealing now than it was back in August. There's no question about it. Right, because they're closer to completing the job in the Donbass, and they have made serious inroads in Zaporozhye. And but looking at, I guess at the same time, you look at Zaporozhye, that's okay. So if we have a temporary ceasefire, we have even more of Zaporozhye right now, than we would have then. So I guess it kind of balances out. He might go for it.
Do you think that if he does go for it, and this is what's happening, do you think that a peace like this could actually hold? That it could be done? Because I mean, what is it? Just what Russia's been saying from the beginning, which includes denazification and demilitarization. Will that be enforced? Will that be done?
Yeah, well, yeah, there are all kinds of challenges. I think all kinds of obstacles. First of all, within Ukraine. I said there is support, growing support. It's probably majority support for some kind of. Well, I mean, Zelensky himself says he's in favor of a ceasefire, and I think, so that's one thing. But an actual peace deal, when they make the promise, essentially give up their claims to this territory forever, agree to withdraw from the Donbass, that's going to be very, very hard for him to do. And I think the ultranationalists are not going to let that happen. I mean, there's going to be, if this deal, if it in fact exists, is anything like an Istanbul Plus, I think, again, you only have the 16% of the country that supports it, and they're probably mostly in the eastern part of Ukraine. I don't see it happening. I mean, that's a problem. You just have to force it on Ukraine, and that's going to. I don't know that, Trump has just shown himself to be often incapable of really sticking to something. This is something you're going to have to fight hard. You can't just make a deal, shake a hand or whatever. You're going to have to follow through, and it's going to be difficult. I mean, we do have the leverage. We could force it on them, but you're going to have to, you can't be talked out of it by the European leaders. You can't let them come back to the Oval Office and convince you to do something else. Again, it just shows like he's just so easily persuaded to depart from some sort of course that he's agreed to. So I just have my doubts about it. And that's okay. We've talked about Ukraine, but yeah, then the Europeans, they're going to be against it. All of those leaders are. And there will be people within his own administration, within his own party, and the Democrats are going to be against it. He's going to be up against an awful lot if this deal is in fact anything like what we imagine it to be. Right. And I just don't think that he can do it. He hasn't laid the groundwork for it. He hasn't, and he just doesn't. He's shown himself to be honestly just kind of incapable of carrying through on these kind of things.
Right.
So I don't see it happening, even if that offer is presented, and even if the Russians accept it.
Right. I mean, even if Trump had the mental fortitude and discipline to stick through and make a plan and agree to it, it doesn't really matter, right? I mean, because we had Minsk 1, We had Minsk two. If you don't have willing and trusting partners on the other side that you can guarantee they count on, it's just not going to work no matter what. I mean, you see what the Europeans are doing. They're just talking about, we got to get on a war footing. We're going to be at war with Russia in a couple of years. We got to ramp up our industrial base. You can't just turn that around, right? I mean, there's no, the Europeans aren't going to be okay with it. Even if Trump agrees to something, they'll still think about what they can do to, support the Zelensky regime or the ultra-nationalist regime, whoever's in power at that time, whatever's left. And so it just, I just think the idea of, it's almost like, as crazy as it sounds, and I almost feel like just NATO needs to collapse. There needs to be a financial collapse. There needs to be and unfortunately, this might happen. Just a complete, just sort of crumbling within the West. Just complete loss of trust in our institutions and the democracy. If we're not able to vote these people out, then it's just the whole thing. I think is just going to crumble down. It's just going to be chaos.
Yeah. Actually, just thinking about the Europeans again too, it's just that they will do what they can to sabotage it. And you can say they're already working on sabotaging any sort of peace deal. With these talk about sending troops into Ukraine, because that would sabotage it. The Russians have made it clear that that's unacceptable. That's part of the reason for the war in the first place. We don't want to have, Western European troops in Ukraine. We don't want to have NATO in Ukraine, or Ukraine to be a part of NATO. And so when Macron and Keir Starmer, they get together and they talk about their plans to send troops to Ukraine, the instant there's some kind of ceasefire, that's a way of saying that, hey, you're not going to have a peace deal. Because if in fact they make that move, then maybe they won't. But the threat to do it is always there, and it's a threat really to sabotage any kind of peace deal is what it is.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I was just thinking the world would be so different if we had Russia join NATO, like, because Putin was wanting to be part of it. Like, imagine the world we'd be living now. I don't know if it'd be a good one, because we'd probably want to use Russia as a battering ram against China. But it's just so insane how we decided to willingly make Russia, our enemy when Putin was trying so hard to integrate to the West, and now it's like, look at this mess. It's just unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, the plan was to actually, I think, as we all know, it was actually to just weaken and in fact, maybe break apart Russia. That was always there. And then to gain control over Russia, to make them into a vassal state the way that, again, the other European states are. But obviously it failed. It completely failed. They just, the West overestimated its abilities and underestimated the strengths of Russia.
Right. I was just thinking about the way China has been behaving towards the United States and comparing it to Russia. And I think China, understood that Russia was kind of forced to not sort of to back its deterrence policy in the beginning, in the 90s, when NATO started expanding. It's because they were so weak and they weren't able to. And because of that, the idea of a Russian red line was always poo-pooed. Be like, oh, whatever, we can cross it, keep on moving, until finally it came to Ukraine, and then it erupted. But we still have this problem with Russia trying to reestablish deterrence. They're really kind of struggling with it because we've crossed it so much before, and we kind of refuse to accept that Russia is really strong now. And even though they're showing off some scary, fancy weapons, we're like, let's just send Tomahawks in there. No deal. Like, this is crazy. This craziness. It's madness, refusing to accept. But I think it's born from that 25, 30 years of just being able to get away and sort of bully Russia around until Russia is being able to stand up. And so now with China, I'm seeing it, here with Taiwan and in the trade wars. I think they understand that, no, we draw a firm red line now, and we dare you to cross it. And if Japan crosses it, we will burn Japan to the ground. Like, that is the policy that they're setting forward, and the same thing with Taiwan. They're just not playing that game. And so I think the U.S. is just in a completely different ball game when it comes to playing with China, and they've been trying to use that sort of Russia, the strategy they have been with Russia, with China, and it's just not working. But I'm a bit worried about what might happen with Japan, because it seems like, Takaichi, she hasn't withdrawn her statement.
Mm-hmm.
The Japan sent over an official to Beijing. The official arrived in Beijing, didn't say a word, didn't speak to anybody. Had this meeting, came out, refused to speak to anybody, didn't say no comment, nothing, just head down, looking pretty glum. It was clear that it was not a good meeting. He couldn't say anything. And Takaichi, I think, has put herself in a pickle where she can't really retract what she said. She'll lose face. And also what she said was somewhat popular amongst her base,
Mm-hmm.
like to do this. But this was, I think people don't understand how big of an issue this is. This isn't just a political gaffe when she said that she would intervene militarily over Taiwan. Biden said that a few times when he was president, but he had the excuse of dementia that it is a political gaffe when he says things. This isn't. I think Takaichi in Japan is in a real bind. I'm not sure exactly how they're going to get out of it, but maybe you can help us understand just why this Taiwan situation is taken so seriously by China, because I think a lot of people are kind of just surprised. Like the response from China was like, Japan is playing with fire and they will perish by fire. Basically, they've just said all of Japan will become a battlefield if they get involved into this.
Right. Yeah. No, it is a very, very serious matter. We'll just say that this is the Chinese are quite sincere about what they're saying. They are furious. It's not a feigned fury, and to understand their fury, you just have to understand their history. China, of course, was a great civilization for centuries, for millennia, and was the greatest power in Asia for the longest time. But it towards the end of the imperial China, during the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, it became very, very weak relative to the West. It's mainly the West. It began to just we all know is the West began to develop very rapidly, technologically, economically, and just put a great deal of distance between itself and China, and it was able to dictate terms to China and to humiliate China. We had the Opium Wars, and then we had these concessions, and places like Shanghai. They simply took territory and acted as they acted without any sort of regard for local authority or sovereignty of China. They humiliated China, and then China regards this. They speak of this a century of humiliation. From approximately the mid 19th century to the mid 20th century. That it for them, the way that the mainland Chinese look at it, it only ended when the communists won the Civil War, and Mao Zedong in 1949 announced that China has finally stood up. That was the end of, and more so than ever, it's the current Chinese Communist Party has tied its own legitimacy to this sense of sovereignty and dignity and of ending the humiliation. It's it used to be more about the Marxism, the class conflict and all of that, the dictatorship of the proletariat, that kind of language has disappeared, but the nationalistic language has stayed and has intensified, and that is really the basis, this nationalism and the sense of dignity, the sense of sovereignty, which upholds the current Chinese government, that really legitimizes them, and that's well understood. It's something that they cannot tolerate, that really does anger them. The thought that Japan would intervene once again on Chinese soil, because you have to understand that Taiwan is considered part of China. And that's something that, again, as I think I mentioned in the last episode, that the whole world basically agrees with, including the U.S., at least at one time. We acknowledged that was part of the deal that we worked out with China. Okay, yeah, you're all one China, and you need to unify. We hope it happens peacefully, but this is a Chinese issue. Now, by making the statement, Japan was saying, we're going back to China. And again, I spoke about the century of humiliation. The Japanese were very much a part of that. Of course, they took Taiwan in a war in 1895 and held it for 50 years. But they also took northeastern China earlier than that, going back into the early 30s. They established a kind of a puppet regime called Manchukuo, and then of course invaded China outright in right before the outbreak of World War II. And responsible for many, many atrocities. So there is, again, a real bitterness. You talk about the century of humiliation. People, they do remember being humiliated by the Europeans and the Americans. But they, in particular, remember the humiliations that were wreaked upon them by the Japanese. And that is, this is something that the Chinese care about deeply. So when they say that the Japanese are playing with fire, they are playing with fire. This is for them a very recent historical memory, and the previous Japanese, prime ministers have been careful, not to go too far, and they understand that the sensitivity here. But this one has ignored, has crossed this line, and has created something of a crisis.
Right. I think within mainland China, there's just a lot of chatter about sort of the resurgence of Japanese imperialism, and it's stirring up a lot of bitter feelings. But I think we also have to understand this isn't just happening in a vacuum. Why would Takaichi make this statement? This is kind of the bigger question. Are we playing some bigger geopolitical game? The United States has been relatively silent about this. If they wanted to de-escalate the situation, they could have made a statement saying like, oh, we still recognize the one China policy, but obviously, of course, we didn't do anything like this. So is this sort of a tacit, green light for Japan to say like, okay, we need to sort of part of a larger strategy within the Indo-Pacific and South China Sea and Korea, Japan, encircle and contain China, because that's right. Obviously the policy of the United States is that this is containment. And so it's a stupid policy, but it seems like, maybe that's what we're doing. It's our puppets. In South Korea, we saw some weird stuff happen last year, and now we have this with Takaichi. This isn't a vacuum. Are they being ordered or encouraged by the United States?
I think in fact, I think that's quite possible. We can go back to Obama or even earlier, but let's just go back to Obama, the pivot to Asia, right? Which many within the let's say the foreign policy elite in the United States has wanted to carry out. Many of them see, again, China as the main threat. They see Russia and the Middle East as a distraction, and they want to pivot to Asia in order to contain China, as you say. And then, Japan clearly is part of that. Now, Biden on 4 occasions said that the U.S. would intervene militarily to defend Taiwan, thereby violating the policy of strategic ambiguity that had been upheld by previous administrations. Now, it may be dementia, but maybe it was part of a real shift, because we have seen a shift, a drift away from previous understandings that had been reached between the United States and China. We've seen this drift take place over, a period of a couple of decades, and it seems to be intensifying now. So we haven't quite gone out. I think if you go to the State Department website, we still recognize Taiwan as a part of China, but we're not acting like it anymore. And then sometimes our president himself is acted, or even previous presidents have acted as though that's no longer true. And we have begun to I think we've sent advisors to Taiwan. We've done things that clearly are raising the hackles of the Chinese. And it is part of all of this, I think, is a part of a policy of containment. And within that policy of containment, Taiwan plays a very, very important role. It's kind of like the Ukraine of Asia. And so, but Japan is obviously a very important part of this coalition to contain China. And so I think it just is, if you look at like the general drift of policy, maybe Takaichi's statement is not that surprising. And like you say, I think very correctly, should be understood in that context. It may not just be something, as about domestic politics. She's maybe not just speaking to her base, but, that could be part of it. It is also geopolitical, and it probably is maybe supported tacitly or behind doors by the Americans.
Right. So do you think that if just thinking in a broader geopolitical strategy for the United States is to get this, the statement from Japan, maybe shore up some supports from South Korea, and then try to encourage the Taiwanese to officially declare independence and to start something? That's the fear. My understanding is in Taiwan, it's split. Half of the people are panicked and like, oh my God, what are you doing? Because they also have, a lot of people in Taiwan have bitter memories of the Japanese as well. I think in 1895, when they came over, I've heard something like maybe 500,000 Taiwanese over that period have been killed, massacres, so there is bitter memories there. And then obviously, my grandpa, your dad, father-in-law, he cursed the Japanese till day died, fought them over in Jiangxi province or Jiangsu, sorry, and came over. Where was I going with this? What did I start with?
Well, you're saying that the Taiwanese are split about this, and then
What was I saying right before that?
Oh yeah, that maybe that the current Lai Ching-te, the current president of Taiwan, might declare independence.
Do you think
maybe
that's the plan?
The Americans pushing them to do that. I think that was the question that you're raising. Right.
Yeah.
Well. I don't think they actually want him to do that openly. It's just like the idea is to be an irritant, to distract Taiwan or to China, to cause it to. I don't know exactly what they're attempting to do,
right?
But I think it's similar. If you go back to, many people talk about that Rand paper that appeared in 2019, extending Russia. And a lot of that was about Ukraine, using Ukraine to distract and to, cause Russia to allocate resources and attention to Ukraine. And therefore, in that way, that's part of the extending Russia. It's, in essence, weakening Russia. And maybe they have something, I think they probably do have something similar, in store for Taiwan. This is they look again as Taiwan as some sort of the Ukraine of Asia. Now, going back to the Rand paper, they actually warned that, hey, maybe you don't want to push it so far that the Russians feel that they have to start a war, that they have to invade. We want to just take it right up to the point. That was the plan. Just calibrate it just so. Now, obviously, that failed. Whenever you hear the word calibrate in a Rand paper, you should run for the hills. It's not going to work. It's just, we're supposed to calibrate things in Syria and everything. It's always a disaster. But I think there's probably something similar. It's just, I think we find it useful for us if we have the DPP in charge and they make these moves towards independence, but we don't want them to go quite so far as to trigger an attack.
How is that useful?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but it just seems to be. How was it useful in Ukraine? It ended in disaster, right? A lot of these think tank projects are just, in the end, they're stupid. It's just we want to meddle. We just have the desire to meddle and make things difficult for the other side. But in the end, it actually achieves nothing. It
makes things difficult for us.
Right. In the end, well, as clearly as it has in Ukraine too. But there's this. This sense that, okay, we can't just be passive. We have to get involved and we have to make it difficult for them. So, we want to anger the Chinese. We want to make them feel pressure, but we don't want to actually have a war. So we'll just kind of encourage our guy there to go right up to the line. And then we'll just whisper in his ear and say, please don't go over the line. But you see how that worked in Ukraine.
Do you see anything happening here? Where do you see this going? Do you see Takaichi? I feel like the only option for her is to be replaced. I don't know if she's going to be able to retract that statement and survive. I don't know or she's going to double down and just piss off China, which is just such a bad. You just don't want to piss off China. Their tourism industry I think it's substantial. I forget the numbers, but a lot of Chinese will go. I mean, it just makes sense. It's right there. You know, like when I went to Japan, you know, I was living in China and we flew to Osaka. You know, it's just like people do that. It's a place to go on vacation. Go to Korea, go to Japan. You know, so and you got 1.4 billion people in China. There's a lot of people. That's a huge tourism industry. So I just think they. It was a huge mistake, and I don't know how exactly Japan is going to extract himself from this. I don't know exactly how Taiwan as well. Both countries are deeply divided on this issue. But what do we see? I just hope that, you know, obviously I have connections, you know, family connections to Taiwan. I have, you know, I worked in China for 10 years. You know, I care about this region. I don't want to see it erupt in flames. But the U.S., like you said, we're always just meddling. Why can't, you know, come on. I mean, just the fact that we just did like some $700 million arms deal to Taiwan, like that's very antagonistic.
Right.
It's like, just imagine, you know, like if China was doing the same thing in Mexico or, you know, Jamaica, we'll send you all these weapons, you know, it's just like.
Right. It's also, even worse because they do consider it Chinese territory.
Right. It'd be like sending it to Puerto Rico, you know, be like,
or every once in a while we have some warships, you know, steam through the Taiwan Strait. Again, it's
just a humiliation.
You flip it
ritual
around and you just say like, hey, wait a second. It's called like the South China Sea for a reason, you know. This is, but here we are and we're insisting on, you know, our right to be there and to intervene, to meddle, you know, and it seems like we just cannot let go of this. You can't just say, okay, hey, you know, there was a time like after in 1945, you know, after our victory in the Second World War, that we were this colossus, you know, and we could act, you know, we could extend power, project power in that way, and not worry about the consequences. You know, the communists won the Civil War in 1949, but they were very weak. They didn't have a navy. They didn't have an air force. You know, so what? Yeah, so sure, you know, have warships steam through the straits. You know, have your military bases in Taiwan. You didn't have to worry. But those days are gone. You know, it's just like we have trouble understanding that it's over. It's past. It was, an unusual set of historical circumstances, and it's over. And we need to adjust and accept that. China is the dominant power of the region, and once again acknowledge, as we've acknowledged previously, that Taiwan is part of its territory, and just and urge them to reach some kind of peaceful settlement. Again, you know, that would have made a whole lot of sense in Ukraine too, but, you know, we just couldn't let that happen. There's just this sense that, hey, you know, we're America, and we can't just let other powers, you know, have their own, exert influence along their own borders. You know, we need to exert control their borders, essentially. You know, it's just like we can't, which once we were able to do, but we can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I think so much of it is just bureaucratic inertia. It's just that we've built up so many of these, I don't know, parts of the CIA and the defense sector that are just geared towards this, and you can't stop it. You can't turn it off. I feel like the only way that we can get rid of it is we have to dismantle like the CIA and the MIC and just start from scratch and say it needs to be geared towards domestic defense, not power projection, not bases, not foreign influence, not meddling, no regime change. It's based on actual defense. But the whole MIC is geared the opposite way. It's geared outwards to meddle. It's not geared inwards to protect and serve the people here in this country.
No, that's a very good point. I think that's true. Yeah, we are dealing with this institutional inertia. And,
and it's just draining this whole country dry. Right. It's just bankrupting us, and it's so frustrating. We can't get anything. The cost of beef is so expensive. Just everything is just like, and it just all this money just going out to cause problems for us in other countries, you know, and of course those countries as well. It's just to sow chaos.
Right. Yeah, I haven't had a steak in a long time, you know, but that's kind of an entirely different topic. But yeah, you know, it's real. You're talking about it. The economic problems are real. One thing is just this is sort of a change the topic. Maybe I shouldn't do it, but just, the fact is that we may be on the verge of a recession. It's always hard to predict, but that will change things even more. We were talking about Ukraine earlier. They go off, we go into a recession, and all those problems that we were talking about earlier become further exacerbated, by our own economic condition. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, we're in rocky times here, and it's just like, like I said, maybe that recession, as horrible it'll be for so many people, at least maybe could bring an end to some of our endless wars and meddling around the world.
I hope so.
But speaking about meddling, I just want to end on Venezuela. This is just always just what's going on there. There's been talk about Maduro and Trump talking and reaching some kind of deal that he's going to try to strong arm him and say, like, make this deal or we're going to kill you, basically. Is that what's going on?
It could be. It could be. I believe Trump could do that. He may be getting cold feet. It's like with so many things, he acts impulsively, he gets into these things, he doesn't really think through them. And now he's got all his navy there off the coast of Venezuela and all the air assets there in Puerto Rico just ready to go. But then he's not hearing from his advisors what he wants to hear. So, oh, there are some real risks here, sir. There's, we're going to have to do this and that, and it could go wrong, and it might lead to, we might have to go in on the ground or whatever. He's not liking what he's hearing. That's all very possible. And then he may be looking at the polls. The most recent poll that I saw showed that only 21% of the country actually supports military intervention to remove Maduro from power. So this is, like in the case you have all these fanatics and the Zionist fanatics in their government, and we have Zionist sentiment within the population, especially now on the right side of the spectrum. So there was some sort of basis in getting involved in a war against Iran, but we just don't have it. There's the anti-Venezuela contention is pretty tiny. It's just basically, probably based in Miami, and that's, where we have Rubio. He's probably the big spokesman for this. He convinced Trump to do this, and then Trump is starting to realize that, hey, maybe this is not going to work. But, so he's looking for some sort of face-saving way to get out of this. And maybe Maduro, maybe there's something that he can do. And maybe they'll end up just agreeing on something that they agreed on several months ago, because I've heard there were negotiations and Maduro was actually open. He didn't obviously want to have a war with the U.S. and said, okay, yeah, you can, we can have a deal. We can, your oil companies can profit. You can be, benefit from our oil industry. We can work something out, win-win. And back then, probably it was torpedoed by Rubio. And then we got the U.S. Navy there in the Caribbean. But now Trump's thought that would be great and we could blow up some things and he would look really cool. And then he's realizing, well, wait, maybe not. Perhaps that deal that we worked out was actually pretty good, and he'll get Maduro to say that, and then he'll go away from it and say, look here,
Right.
Once again, Trump,
The deal maker.
The deal maker, I know how to do it, when he could have had it months ago, but that's a possibility. That would be the best solution. Again, I think it's still shameful, that we exert this kind of pressure, to get him, it's not the way things should happen. It's obviously a bullying tactic, but it's better than a war.
Do you think there's a possibility that Maduro will say, no, we're not going to deal with you like this. We don't negotiate under threats like this.
Right.
If if you want to do this, you pull everything back and we can meet at some place
to
discuss.
Yeah.
But we're not doing it at the point of a gun here.
Yeah. Well, that's possible. I mean, you say it's face saving for Trump, but it also has to be face saving for Maduro. So if there are negotiations, because, Maduro himself, I think, he takes pride in again, a lot of what they could say it's a Bolivarian government. And a lot of that is about sovereignty. It's something that really matters. Again, the United States has a reputation, a very well-deserved reputation of being a bully in Latin America. And part of what the Bolivarians are all about is standing up to that bullying. And so he has to be careful about what he does. He can agree to some things, but he can't, it has to be done in a manner in which his sovereignty and his dignity, or the dignity of his and sovereignty of his government, are respected.
Right. Well, I feel like we have to find out relatively soon. I don't know how long we can leave our whole Navy there off that coast. It's just, but I agree. I think that was my line of thinking as well, that he's realizing that this could be really bad if we actually go in on the ground, or even if we just try to, do a decapitation strike and try to enact a regime change, it could go haywire. And I think he's getting cold feet and wants to try to get a deal with Maduro to say that he has a win. Like, look what I did, and now I got this $50 billion moving into the the U.S. All these crazy numbers he makes up, right. But there could be a chance that Maduro doesn't play along, and so we'll see. We'll see. A lot to keep an eye on.
Or maybe Rubio will win out, and Trump will decide to go. There are pressures.
We didn't even talk about the Epstein file release. I guess, but for that we just have to just wait and see. I'll wait until there's an actual arrest and like what is happening. Because like I'm sure they sanitize the crap out of that.
Yeah, that's a problem. We can get into that later. That's a whole other can of worms there.
Right. Okay, well, I think we can end it there, Dad.
Sure.
Okay, have a good rest of your day. I'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.